In earlier modules, we talked about the Great Depression, right? How the economy of the United States was struggling with massive unemployment, businesses shutting down, banks failing. And you have FDR, right, President Roosevelt, trying to pass a number of different policies to get the United States out of the Great Depression. Okay, but ultimately, the New Deal policies do not solve the economic problems of the Great Depression, right? What does bring the United States out of the Great Depression is World War II, because World War II involved massive government spending. Okay, and that spending put money in the pockets of Americans and gave them jobs. Okay, and so that's what it took. But before we get to World War II and the economy during that time, let's talk a little bit about the events that led to World War II. Okay, so you have a number of different countries that are trying to expand, gain territory, right? You have Japan, you have Germany, and you have Italy, right? So they're trying to build their nations by expanding into territory that belong to other countries, invading other countries, basically. And those are the events that lead eventually to World War II. Okay, so first, let's start off with the example of Japan. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, right? This is in northeast China. And this signals Japan's intentions to expand its empire, right? The more territory you have, the more resources are at your disposal, right? And this is going to help to boost your economy. And Manchuria was rich in a number of different natural resources, right? So from that point forward, Japan then proceeded to invade a number of different provinces in eastern China. That's mostly where the war is taking place, okay? And they're being met with fierce Chinese resistance. One of the key events of this invasion was the Nanking Massacre, right? Nanking is one of the largest cities in eastern China at this time, all right? Japanese soldiers there were ordered to execute thousands of people in the city of Nanking, right? Not just soldiers, but they're also executing civilians, right? So it's estimated that there was about 300,000 people that were killed, not to mention thousands of women that were raped by Japanese soldiers, okay? So that's one example of this invasion, bloody resistance, as China is trying to fight off the occupation of their country by Japan, right? Eventually, Japan would gain a tenuous hold over several key areas in eastern China. Meanwhile, in Europe, you start to see the rise of various different governments that promote the rights of the state, okay? Not the rights of individuals, but the rights of the state. I'm talking about the rise of Nazi Germany and the rise of fascist Italy. Okay, so to these governments, what is most important is the strength of the nation. Okay, they're not fighting for freedom of speech and freedom of religion. No, they're talking about strengthening the state. And one way to increase the strength of the state is the addition of new territory. All right, so in Italy, under the leadership of Benito Mussolini, you have Mussolini focusing on expanding the power of the state by invading Ethiopia. Okay, so Italy invades Ethiopia in 1935. A couple of years later, you have Italy invading Albania in Eastern Europe in 1939, right? So expanding territory, right? Strengthening the state, right? Gaining colonies. These are all the efforts of fascist Italy. Same with Nazi Germany, right? In Germany, you have Adolf Hitler rising to prominence, becoming a political leader, right? And he is focusing on restoring Germany's economic and political power, right? After the country had been experiencing massive economic depression and the humiliation of having to pay reparations to Britain and France and being forced to accept the blame of World War I, right? I'm talking about the Treaty of Versailles, right? With the Treaty of Versailles, it dictated that Germany had to pay reparations and accept blame for the war. So Hitler sought to reinvigorate Germany's national pride by invading and annexing surrounding territories where there were large German populations, right? It all started when German troops occupied the Rhineland. Okay, the Rhineland is located on the border with France. This is in 1936. And this area was not supposed to be a militarized zone, right? This is part of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was not to send troops into the Rhineland, right? Because it's right there on the border of France, and France is, very anxious about German military buildup so close to their country after World War I. All right, but Hitler does it anyway because he's saying, hey, we're going to break these aspects of the Treaty of Versailles. We're not going to be held down by this treaty anymore. And so he sends troops into the Rhineland. In 1938, Germany annexes Austria, right, with a huge German population, and the Sudetenland, right, which is part of Czechoslovakia, which also has a large German population at that time. So when the Allied powers, we're talking about Britain and France, finally meet with Hitler, right, to talk about what's going on here, all this territorial expansion, this is at the Munich conference in 1938, they don't really do anything to stop Hitler, okay? They felt that if they just let him annex these areas where there are large German populations, eventually he would stop his plans for territorial expansion, right? This is known as the policy of appeasement, okay? Appeasement takes place at the Munich conference. Britain and France trying to appease Hitler. Let's just give him some of this territory, that'll appease him, and then he'll stop, okay? He's just trying to regain territory where there's large German populations, right? This is from the perspective of Britain and France, because they don't want to enter into another world war, right? They're afraid of that. They're trying to, do whatever they can to avoid another world war because it's, huge loss of life, destruction to the infrastructure of their countries. They're trying to avoid it, okay? So they're trying to just appease Hitler, let him have these little pieces of territory, right? And then he'll stop. But he doesn't stop. Okay, Hitler continues to invade a number of other territories, such as Czechoslovakia, right? All of Czechoslovakia, he's going to eventually take control of. Another aspect of Hitler's plan to return Germany to its state of glory was to blame Jewish people for a lot of the problems of the country, right? So he's blaming Jewish people in his book, Mein Kampf, in speeches. He's claiming that Jewish people threaten the racial purity of the Aryan race, right? He's saying that, Germans are the Aryan race, okay? And his final solution to this problem was to force Jewish people into concentration camps and death camps where they were used for their labor and eventually were murdered in horrible ways, such as in gas chambers. An estimated 6 million Jewish people died as a result of the Holocaust. And so these are different examples of how Hitler is attempting to restore the national pride of Germany, improve its economy, and this is why he has so much support behind him at this time. You have millions of people who are going to his rallies, who are supporting what he's doing, right? And so you start to see the rise of these governments, fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, that are trying to strengthen their nations through territorial expansion. And eventually, this is going to lead to World War II. So where is the United States when all this is happening? Well, the US is deep within the policy of isolationism at that time, okay? Isolationism, we talked about this before. The US doesn't really want any part of these foreign affairs, okay? So Congress wanted to maintain that isolationism in the early part of the war. They passed the Neutrality Acts, which made it illegal for Americans to be riding on ships that belonged to countries that were involved in the war, okay? Trying to avoid an issue like what happened with the Lusitania again, right? Remember, the sinking of the Lusitania was one of the issues that helped to bring the United States into World War I, right? Because there were US citizens on board of this British ship, the Lusitania, right? So there's like, actual laws being passed to avoid that from happening again, okay? The Neutrality Acts. The Neutrality Acts also stopped the US from selling weapons to countries that were involved in the conflict. So isolationism, okay? The US does not want any part of this war that's starting to develop there in Europe. And there were some powerful Americans who were really not interested in joining the war against Germany because they were in business with Germany, right? For example, you have a couple of very powerful automobile companies who have plants in Germany, factories in Germany, right? And so you have, like, for example, Ford Motor Company, right? Henry Ford, he had factories in Germany, right? And during the war, these factories used slave labor, right? A lot of these slaves were Jewish captives. And we have documentation that shows that Henry Ford also had connections to one of the most notorious death camps, Auschwitz, right? Where 1 million people died during the Holocaust. Okay, so yeah, you have American companies that are heavily involved here, right? That are actually helping the Nazi war effort. General Motors was another one. General Motors was accused of also having factories in Germany that supplied war materials to the Nazis. Okay, so yeah, there's some Americans who really are not interested in being involved in World War II because they're profiting from their business in Germany. Okay. All right, in 1939, you're going to have the invasion of Poland, and this is what sets off World War II. Before this, all the territorial expansion that we were talking about, Japan, Italy, and Germany, had not actually led to World War II just yet, right? Because no one was trying to stop them, okay? So in 1939, we have the Soviet Union, which at the time was under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, he had gained control of the Soviet Union after the death of Vladimir Lenin. Okay, so you have Stalin signing a non-aggression pact with Germany, meaning that they're not going to go to war with each other. Remember, right? Russia or the Soviet Union was a part of the Allied powers in World War I. But now you have the Soviet Union signing a non-aggression pact with Germany saying, hey, if you guys go to war with the Allies, we're not going to get involved. Non-aggression. Okay, and also the Soviet Union made a secret agreement with Germany, right? And the agreement was that if the Soviet Union supports the invasion of Poland, then they get some of the territory in Poland. Basically, Germany and Russia would divide Poland up after Germany invades Poland and takes it over. Okay, but things kind of took a turn for the worse for the Soviet Union because Hitler turns on Stalin and begins an invasion of the Soviet Union itself after the invasion of Poland. Okay, so Germany invades Poland, and Soviet Union's like, okay, great, we're going to get part of Poland. But no, Hitler double crosses him and begins to send forces into the Soviet Union. Okay. All right, so like I said, it's the invasion of Poland that starts World War II because Poland was an ally of Britain and France. And so they had to stop their policy of appeasement, right? Remember the Munich conference, they stopped their policy of appeasement, and now they're going to declare war on Germany after the invasion of Poland because Poland was an ally of Britain and France. Okay, and so at that point, Germany is going to move to strike against both France and Britain. In 1940, we have the invasion of France taking place. So Germany is going to quickly invade France and gain control of most of the country, right? They're going to gain control of Paris. And then after this, we're going to see the aerial bombing campaign against Britain. And that's the Battle of Britain in 1940, which lasts into 1941. Okay, so basically, Germany had planned to strike Britain quickly, right? The blitzkrieg, the lightning strikes. Let's just hit them really fast before they can mobilize their army, and we'll get a quick victory, and it'll be over, right? That's the idea of Germany, right? That's the German army's plan, okay? They're trying to catch them off guard. And so, although London suffered heavy damage, and other cities in England as well, with high civilian casualties, Britain was able to stave off the German invasion, okay? The Battle of Britain convinced the United States finally to break the Neutrality Acts, right, and supply Britain with weaponry, okay? But that weaponry had to be paid for in cash and transporting that weaponry in British ships, not American ships, because the U.S. is still trying to stay out of the war. But eventually it got to the point where Britain couldn't even afford to pay in cash anymore. So the United States had to extend credit to them, like pay us back when you can. All right, so now the US is still not involved in World War II, but they're starting to help the Allies against Germany.